Hi, my name is Lee, and today I want to tell you about all of the books that I've been wanting to reread instead of new books. So this is a thing that every once in a while I want to reread books, and for most of my life, rereading hasn't been a thing for me. It's been more of a thing in the last few years when it's like, I know I read a book, but I forgot what happened. I know I loved it. I want to reread it. Or I want to see if my opinions have changed about it. But most of these are books that I really, really, really loved. And I just want to re-experience the magic. And because they're rereads, and I also didn't reread for a very, very long time, most of these I haven't read for 10, 15 years. Not very few of them are books that I have read recently at all. Let's actually start with the one I've actually read the closest, and that is, I would like to reread someday in the future the Enchanted Forest series by Patricia C. Reedy. I think I just finished Talking to Dragons, the last book of it, probably 2018. Probably right as I was starting my booktube channel was when I was finishing this series. This is a series about a princess named Cimmerine who doesn't want to be a princess, so she gets herself kidnapped by a dragon so that way she can just become whatever she wants to be. And the dragon is all game for it, and so she becomes the head librarian and chef to this dragon named Kazul. And I love this series. It is middle grade. Probably the oldest book series on this list now that I haven't read in a while. And I've read a couple of these more recently because I was going to do a proper reread, and then I dropped it a couple years ago, and I haven't read anymore, so I'm like, I think I'll just start over and do a proper, complete reread. And that is The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. This is one of my favorite books. And I would like to reread it. When I originally read a lot of them, I read them as audiobooks, and so I might do that again because it's my childhood. I loved them. I originally had these read out loud to me when I was very, very young, and then reread them again probably when I was 10 or 12. And I've reread The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe a couple times since. But I know The Silver Chair and The Horse and His Boy I always said were my favorites, but I haven't read them in a long time. So I want to know if that's changed. I'm pretty sure I've only read The Last Battle once because it terrified me as a child. So there. Similarly to Chronicles of Narnia, is I would like to reread The Door Within books by Wayne Thomas Batson. This is a trilogy. The first book being The Door Within, then The Rise of the Wormlord, and then The Final Storm. These are, again, a portal fantasy book series that is Christian fiction. It's about these teenagers who realize that they can switch bodies with these people in a fantasy realm. And that the fantasy realm is at war, and they need someone from our side of the portal to help defeat the evil bad guys. I love this series. Like, I remember reading The Door Within, finishing the series, and then rereading the first book, and then never finishing the other two. So I'd like to do a proper reread of these at some point in the future. Another Chronicles, let's get through more fantasy, because a lot of these are fantasy. You know it was going to show up, is The Chronicles of Prydain, or The Prydain Chronicles, by my darling, my favorite, Lloyd Alexander. Yeah. I love Lloyd Alexander, and The Chronicles of Prydain is one of my favorites. I've only reread The Book of Three once, and I really want to reread these, you know? And I also have multiple copies of this, so you might see different ones that I pick up. This is a series about the assistant pig Tipur Karin, the Princess Elanwi, and their companions Gurgi, Fluther, and Dolly as they go around to defeat the evil Horn King and his boss, the devil. Then there's zombies. I would like to reread Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I would like to reread all of the Jane Austen books, but specifically Pride and Prejudice because I read this when I was like 14, 15-ish. Was not into classics at that point. I didn't get into classics until I read Three Musketeers by Alexander Dumas, which is why Alexander Dumas is one of my favorite authors ever. But I read this at a time when I was just really not understanding what was going on. I wasn't into Regency stuff. I wasn't into romance books. And right now I've been on a Georgette Heyer Regency romance kick. So rereading Pride and Prejudice might be one of the books that's more sooner rather than later. But I'd like to do that soon. Also, I'm just going to show off quick that this is a Borders Classic edition, and I miss Borders with all of my being. I remember my family having to switch libraries when I was at a tender age, I guess, because I distinctly remember the first book I read at this new library. That is still my favorite library, just so you know. But the first book I read was Ingo by Helen Dunmore, and I own the whole series now because I had to. Actually, I don't own the whole series. Whole series. I don't have Stormswept, which is like the sequel companion book, but I have the actual quartet. Ingo, however, is the story about Sapphire, who finds out that she is part mermaid, so when she goes underwater, she can hold her breath for a very, very long time, kind of thing. Actually, she doesn't really need to even hold her breath because oxygen, pours into her because she's part mermaid. Throughout the book series, she has to decide whether she's going to become mermaid or human, or whether she's a mixture of the two. She has a twin named Connor who also has to make the same decisions. And she meets mer people and become friends with them, and I love this series. Because it's a British series, I had to wait 2 years between each book, and I distinctly remember the crossing of Ingo coming out and not having access to it. Being like, how do I get this book? Because it's the last book and I wanted it. And I had to wait 5 years for this one. So I had just these really long gaps in between the books, and I would really like to read them kind of one after the other and kind of learn the story again that way. I talked about this in one of my recent books wrap-ups, is I would like to reread The Two Princesses of Amar. I just read The Lost Kingdom of Amar, which is one of my favorite books of 2021. But this is the first book. Short. It is about a plague that hits Amar, and two princesses have to deal with it. One of them gets the plague and the other one has to rescue and find the cure for the plague. I don't know if this will be the best book ever, having come out of what we've been through the last few years, but it might also be really healing to read a book that I read as a child about a plague, and then reading it now having gone through a plague. Yeah. So this is on my list. Around the same time of reading Princesses of Amar, I was really into princess plus dragon books, because in case you didn't know, Two Princesses of Amar has a dragon in it. And I already talked about the Enchanted Forest series, which is also about dragons. I had a huge phase of dragons, okay? Another series I want to do with dragons is Dragon Slippers by Jessica Day George. This is about a girl named Creel who gets captured by a dragon on her way to the kingdom to become a dressmaker, and she strikes a deal with the dragon, so in exchange for her freedom or whatever, she'll do something or other. She ends up with these magic shoes. And I've said this before, but I love magic shoes in books. I just do. Probably because of this book. So she gets these magic slippers that give her complete control of dragons. But I would like to read them back to back. Let me talk about, I would like to do a reread of Beowulf. This one is a translation by Stephen Mitchell. I know Tolkien has a translation of Beowulf somewhere or other. And this is probably, I think this is the edition that I read originally in high school. Because I had to read Beowulf in high school. What did you do in high school? My assigned reading was Beowulf. So I read this in high school. I remember enjoying it and liking it. Because I don't know why. I hated classics, but I loved epic poetry. But I reread, in 2020, I reread The Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which was one of my favorites, and it's still one of my favorites. And so I would like to continue my epic poetry rereads by reading Beowulf. I would like to reread The Squire's Tales by Gerald Morris. I love this series. It's a 12-book series. I have the first 5 books-ish. I have? Yeah, I own 8 of them. I still need to find the other 4. These are Arthurian legend retellings. They're the best I've ever read, I think. I've read quite a few Arthurian legend retellings, and I swear these are the best. Cross my heart, these are the best. They are about Terence, who is the squire to Sir Gawain, and Terence finds out that he is part fairy, or he is fairy or something, and so Terence has to help Gawain as he's going through his quest to become a knight. They're so good, and he meshes it all really well and sets up the end really well too. I would like to reread Poison by Chris Whitting because I've said this before in another video, but this was my favorite book in high school. About a girl named Poison whose sister is replaced by a changeling, and so Poison has to go to the fairy court to save her. I've only read it once. It scared the living daylights out of me, but it still was one of my favorite books of all of high school. And I would really like to reread it, especially as I want to read Chris Whitting's new book, The Ember Blade. I know this was my favorite, though, of his work that I've ever read. So far. I mean, The Ember Blade might top it, you know? But we'll see. And lastly, I would like to reread The Agency Quartet by Y.S. Lee. That is A Spy in the House, The Body in the Tower, The Traitor in the Tunnel, and then Rivals in the City. These are a series of books about a young woman named Mary who is half Irish, half Chinese. She gets taken in by an agency, which is a finishing school for young women to turn them into spies. This one, she gets her first assignment as a lady's companion in a household where she has to figure out a mystery. And I love this series. I loved the books as I read them. And they were one of those, again, I read these as they were coming out and I loved them. And I really want to reread them at some point soon. And they're steampunk! Like, I've been reading the Finishing School books by Gail Carriger, which are super fun and steampunk, but they're like fantasy steampunk, and these are like historical fiction steampunk, so very different steampunk styles. I have more books that I would want to reread, because whenever I read a book and it's 5 stars, I love it to pieces, and I want to reread it, you know? But for now, this video is super long, and it's long enough, I think. So I hope you're having a lovely afternoon. I hope you're reading good books. Tell me what you're reading down in the comments. What do you want to reread in the coming years? I hope you're having a lovely afternoon and are reading good books, though. Bye. La morte alta. And people say it's ripping off Lord of the Rings all the time, even though there's zombies in this book. And Lord of the Rings only has werewolves and vampires. I don't know.